You've covered quite some territory, from Napoleonic cadastre to Hurricane Sandy, with stops at HIPAA and a sensor-driven world, the challenge of climate and policy making. Jerry Mechling, come tell us how the world looks to you. You've led government executives, you've taught them. What do you think makes this interesting and important? What should we be attending to next?
Thanks, Zach. Let me see. I have a few ideas on that, although with 6 minutes and lunch ahead of us, let me see if I can find the right stuff here and get ourselves started with this round. This is Tumen. That's the one I want. And I want to open it up to there. And let me see to get the slideshow. And from the beginning, that's good enough. That'll probably do it. The challenge here is sharing all this information and thinking about it as an infrastructure. Infrastructure is a very nice word, very nice concept. It tends to mean that you've got something that's going to be very expensive now to make later things much more powerful, much less expensive. So governments have long been very involved in infrastructure stuff, but a lot of the infrastructure that gets started as a powerful set of ideas and maybe early experience never makes it. So I think our real question right now is what might be the next steps in understanding all the conflicts in the current infrastructure between the wonderful things that might be done and the horrible worries we have about what might happen with that. How do we think about those? Well, in 6 minutes, I've got 3 ideas that I'm going to lead to lunch with, and they're from 50,000 feet, so they're pretty simple, and I'll try to make them reasonably simple. The core idea for me, much like Jonathan Zittrain yesterday starting off with the internet and its early stuff, how many people remember gossip versus TCP/IP? Okay, gossip was going to be a set of standards for internet and communications and proceeded largely by thinking and negotiating. And thinking and negotiating, particularly the negotiation part, can take a long time. The TCP/IP world was much more biased towards the hum in the room for an operational consensus on a small step that led to actual behavior and experience. And that won the day in terms of creating the infrastructure of the internet that got out there to be big enough to take off. I think that analogy is the one that I'm sort of trying to pursue. We've got a systems problem. And some systems are pretty easy to understand, largely because you get quick and clear feedback. Most people learn to ride a bicycle, therefore get the value out of it, in maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, fall down a couple of times, real quick and clear feedback. We're designing the infrastructure here for sharing spatial data, but the complexities tend to mean we get slow, very ambiguous feedback. It's a harder problem. It's a problem that I might say was like this one. Anybody recognize who's in the picture? It's Dom and Joe. That is, most people recognize Joe from the coffee, if not from everything else. But a lot of people, particularly in Boston, however, they should remember Dom. Dom was really very good. You know, hit more than 300, led, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What a lot of people don't really recognize about Dom was the difficulties he had early as not a very good learner. Why? Dom needed glasses. If you don't have the information and the feedback and the models to focus on the problem at hand, you can't do very well. I think it's interesting now what IBM says, and they may be right, that 90% of the data we could have to model on any problem has actually been created in the last 2 years. We are incredibly walking into a world of more data. The interesting part is, are we getting feedback on the right problems? And for this domain, in this world, the problems of, will this spatial information be used in a way that we harvest the value and avoid the risks? Well, to do that, we have to use it. And to use it, it's a work design and redesign problem. Now, very, very simply, we obviously have to have some technology and some people to run the technology, largely the kind of folks in this room. But the big things happen when that information begins to redesign the work that actually does the world's interactions, the internal services and the external services of a government or another group. To put money on this, I was the budget director for the city of Boston for a few years. I tend to do these kind of things. For every dollar you've got in the actual technology, it tends to take 3, maybe 4 to have the people to buy it, run it, do something with it. And that's maybe at most 5% of what most institutions and certainly what most governments are doing. The big money and impact comes, do you change how you do human resources management, how you do financial management, how you do the internal services, the building management of governments and other institutions, and does it change how we do public safety, how we do education, how we do health care, how we do the things that our society needs? Those are the answers that need to be yes for an information infrastructure that starts to be used enough to become the true information infrastructure we want it to be. We have to answer questions that are tending to go from the left-hand side, where we focus and know and can measure stuff, but we're making predictions that become more uncertain and risky, and often involve a lot of politics and negotiation. The information-based work attributes that we're changing, that we haven't talked about much here, but I think need to be talked about if we're going to make sense of this into the future, are really 4 very fundamental things. We have actually talked about accountability under the phrase of privacy. Do people see in the group what we have done and what the results of that are? We can make that much clearer than it used to be, and there's some good news to that and some difficult news to that. How will we resolve that structure? Also, we're making available the world's knowledge to people away from their desk, and it turns out that a lot of time is away from our desk. And this world is going to influence that a lot. And the world of work and mobile stuff for that needs to be thought about how it will change that work and the costs and benefits to that. We can then coordinate over a much larger scale of people, thinking about basketball teams or baseball teams or others. When you can recruit from a larger population, you can often get a better team assembled. And what we are doing with much of the world's work over the last 100 years is shifting the global integration from physical things to services and information-based things. And the world of changed work relations is very important there, particularly when it comes to innovation, knowing that what's better than it was 100 years ago isn't because we've worked harder at the things we knew how to do 100 years ago. All the real value comes from finding new ways to do things, and every time we add a new way, there is a risk, and somebody who doesn't necessarily think that that's in their interest. In fact, I would argue 2 things now. That the core kind of problem we want to be focusing on is what will be the impact downstream on actually the services and the applications. And while I do believe that the infrastructure design is very important here, I think we always have to keep marrying it to the right kind of applications that give us feedback that says, is this really worth it? Is this really what we want? And the TCP/IP idea was that they worked much more on an experience-based path than just a straight negotiation path. The big value is downstream. And here's the last 2 ideas. One is that then fundamentally, we have a lot of different stakeholder groups who are looking at this stuff. And they don't see it the same way. So fundamentally, we have a negotiation and a governance problem. How do we decide something where we have a collective decision to be made and we don't all agree? 2 of the fundamental things I think we need to do are to understand to what degree are the people who have to act differently in an information-based world, a geographically and especially information-based world. What do they have to be able to do? What is their degree of confusion in knowing how they will participate? And what do they perceive to be in their interest? What's their degree of conflict? We have workers whose lives are going to change based on this. We have consumers of work whose lives are going to change based on this. We have managers of work whose lives are going to change based on this, and they don't see it the same way. As we're working to get policy which will lag behind the actual behavior, I think we should take some advantage of that and make sure that we get the degree of planning to overcome confusion, the capacity to negotiate to resolve the conflicts, and particularly to make good judgment calls when we've got a lot of both involved. But my sense is that in doing this, a reputation to keep it moving forward, to test the validity of the value of the various things that we can do, will be very critical, and I'll leave for lunch with 3 hypotheses about where the value might lie. I actually don't know at all. You guys know an awful lot more about the details of this world than I do, but having worked with government folks and non-government folks on trying to turn this capacity into action, 3 ideas I'd come forward with. In balancing the getting the spatial information, this incredible fire hose of stuff that we now have, versus using it, I'd put a lot of attention onto the use and the use value, the work design, and getting experience, the TCP/IP kind of world, not just the gossip world, to influence these negotiations. That's the first thing I would do. On that, we know that there's a lot of angst and appropriate fear that we'll do the wrong things, and that may make us do no thing, which in fact isn't a very good idea. Take advantage of the fact that government, while being slow, is in a world where we have a lot of social networking that's going to run with this stuff right away. So we are going to get some experience based on what's really going on, and the private sector is seeing a buck in this, and they're out there. So government may need to step in, but government needs to look at what's really happening. And the research, I think, should be very much on how are the applications changing and changing the cost effective of what we do. So we need to stay close to the various stakeholders that are key. The researchers, there ought to be some money for and some examination of the way thought can get ahead of and structure and provide models for deciding these things. That's very key. Entrepreneurs are thinking a lot about this stuff and staying close to that. And, you know, the old Defense Department going out to, that seemed to me to be a sensible idea from their perspective. But the workers, the managers, the consumers, and the citizens, et cetera. It may be that we haven't talked enough about these sort of 3 pragmatic TCP/IP-oriented steps forward. Or maybe we have, but at least now we've come to a lunch where we could. Thank you very much. Take care.
Well, we've covered the bases here this morning. We're a little bit coming up onto lunch, but we've had a great panel. I want to say thanks to LaTanya Sweeney, Chris Tucker, Bern Rent, Raj Singh, Mike Gentile, and Jerry Mechling. Thank you. I'm ready for lunch. How about you? Let's go.
Come see me right down at the microphone right now.